In 1865, 4 million Americans were legally emancipated from chattel slavery, but they entered the post-war economy with zero land, zero capital, or tools. That same year, Black leaders gathered in Savannah, Georgia, to define what they needed to survive. Their spokesperson, a Baptist minister named Garrison Frazier, made it clear. The top priority was land. They knew that without the ability to till their own soil, true self-sufficiency was impossible. The federal government initially listened. Under Union General William T. Sherman, Special Field Order No. 15 allocated 400,000 acres of confiscated coastal land in South Carolina, Georgia, and Florida to newly freed families. For a brief moment, there was a tangible path to economic autonomy. Without it, physical freedom meant nothing more than the right to starve, leaving a massive population entirely vulnerable to systemic exploitation. But that path was quickly cut off. Lincoln's successor, President Andrew Johnson, rescinded the order. He stripped the distributed acreage from freed families and handed the land back to former Confederates. This map shows the stark disparity in federal policy at the time. While the government was returning this southern coastal land to Confederate planters, the Homestead Act was simultaneously giving away 246 million acres of western land, almost entirely to white settlers. Back in the South, this created a severe economic stalemate. White planters had their massive estates, but their Confederate currency was worthless. The freedmen had their physical labor, but completely lacked land to work. The Freedmen's Bureau attempted to negotiate labor contracts to restart the agricultural economy. What emerged was a makeshift arrangement known as sharecropping. It was pitched as a mutually beneficial solution. Workers would farm a plot of land and split the harvest with the owner. But born out of absolute desperation, the system was built on a massive power imbalance. This matrix breaks down the exact legal distinctions. Unlike chattel slavery, the landowner no longer owned the worker. Unlike tenant farming, where the farmer owned tools and rented the dirt, a sharecropper brought nothing to the table except raw human labor. To see how this extracted wealth, we can look at the physical contracts. In 1882, the Grimes family in North Carolina issued a standard agreement to their workers. The math was rigid. Croppers were entitled to half the cotton and corn, dropping to 2/5 if they fell short. It dictated strict timelines, banned independent vine crops, and enforced a 5-cent penalty for missing a mandatory team feeding. Meeting these quotas required intense, back-breaking manual labor from the entire family, working from sunrise to sundown, just to fulfill the obligations of the agreement. These documents were highly engineered legal instruments. They were designed to legally replicate the rigid economic control of a plantation, extracting maximum output without holding the title of slavery. Because sharecroppers started with nothing, they had to survive until the fall harvest. Landowners or merchants furnished them with food, seed, and clothing on credit from the plantation store. To secure these supplies, merchants required a crop lien, a legal mortgage on the unplanted harvest. The interest rates were exorbitant, frequently reaching 50% or more annually, quickly outpacing the expected value of the cotton. When harvest arrived, the landlord controlled the industrial choke points. They dictated the ginning, the packing, and the final sale of the crop. Sharecroppers, many kept illiterate, had no right to view the ledgers or negotiate prices. If the harvest was poor or cotton prices dropped, the sharecroppers' half of the yield rarely covered their accumulated debt. The remaining balance was simply rolled over into the next year, compounding exponentially. White farmers were caught in this trap in massive numbers as well. But black sharecroppers faced an additional layer of subjugation, severely restricted by violent enforcement and deliberate exclusion from the political process. Southern states actively passed statutes that made it a criminal offense for a laborer to leave a job without permission while they owed money to a landlord. Through the strict mathematics of the crop lien system, economic debt became a physical prison, effectively erasing the physical mobility that emancipation had promised. Industrialization, alongside massive shifts in federal economic policy, eventually rendered the entire agricultural system of sharecropping completely obsolete. During the Great Depression, the federal government passed the Agricultural Adjustment Act, paying landlords to reduce their planted acreage. With less land in production, owners had a massive financial incentive to evict their sharecroppers. But the final blow to the sharecropping system came from technology. As mechanical cotton pickers arrived in the fields, they could do the work of dozens of people, rapidly eliminating the demand for human labor. Landowners utilized government subsidies to purchase this new, expensive machinery. The capital required to mechanize completely locked out the displaced tenants. Government intervention, designed to rescue American agriculture, effectively subsidized the permanent eviction of the sharecropper. Facing starvation, mechanization, and racial violence, millions of agricultural workers fled the South for northern industrial cities in the Great Migration. This chart illustrates the long-term devastation. From their peak in 1920, the number of Black-operated farms in the United States collapsed by nearly 94% over the next 60 years. Even for those who managed to hold on to their land, institutional barriers persisted. In 1982, the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights reported that discriminatory lending by the Farmers Home Administration was stripping property from remaining Black farmers. This continuous loss of land meant the primary vehicle for building equity and transferring assets to the next generation was systematically dismantled. Emancipation ended human bondage, but the architecture of sharecropping proved that legal freedom, when deliberately separated from land and capital, does not equal economic independence.